Gotta get that out of the way. Sorry.
Yeah. We're gonna, well, welcome everybody. So we get this officially started. We're gonna be talking about the difference between a house and a home. And I think that this discussion is important because it gets down to the basic human organizing unit, the family, and what that means to us. And it just occurs to me that other than finding out who we are, our first interactions with humans are usually around family. And because that's the case, and families live in houses slash homes, that's an important conversation to have. So I'd like to kind of take a canvas around people and talk about first, just describe what you think a house is. Now that may seem rather obvious, but when we talk about providing housing, it's not so simple as what a house is. At least when I'm talking to like housing development people, it's not all that simple. So I like to just get some feedback from those of you who are with us. How would you describe a house vis-a-vis humans?
Habitable enclosure.
Say that again. You were muffled, Charles.
Habitable enclosure.
A habitable enclosure. Very nice. I like that. Very succinct. Anyone else?
I put in the chat, what is a house? A structure that provides safety.
Okay. A structure that provides safety. Mhm. Anyone else?
I think a lot of times, we use that as like a base too. So a house, a lot of times we think of the place we return to. It isn't always home, but a house is like where you're living, right? So it's the place you return to, because work can be in different places, whatever else goes on during the day, but the house is where you return to.
Mm-hmm. So all of your answers kind of almost demands maybe a list of things that would be, let's say, desirable, if not mandatory, to have in a house, like bare minimum though, bare minimum desirable things. For example, a TV might be, in some cases, it might be desirable, but if you didn't have one, I wouldn't say maybe it's even a better house.
How about toxin-free?
Toxin-free, okay.
I say that because a lot of our housing, including housing that's been provided, public housing and so forth, has proved to be toxin. Toxicity permeated with the construction materials and whatever. A lot of people have been afflicted with various maladies because of the ignorance of what infects us and what doesn't, and also because of the callousness sometimes of those doing the constructing.
You say callousness or carelessness?
Callousness and carelessness.
Oh, okay.
Both, And so cutting corners do things cheaper and increase the profit margin sometimes creates housing which is toxic. And the government, I think, is culpable in that regard too. So that's a big concern of mine, always has been, the extent to which houses themselves are unhealthy for human beings. They're toxic. Then we could talk, about toxicity beyond physical. That's another topic of the philosophical discussion, I suppose. Sometimes houses have toxic physical or psychological environments, emotional environments. But let's start with the physical. I think a main problem in American history, which is ongoing, is the toxicity of the physical toxicity of our housing.
Okay, excellent point. Excellent points. Anyone else?
Think of water as being one of the most basic needs, and also just protection from the elements.
Protection from the elements and water. Okay. Anyone else has ideas about what is important to have in something we will refer to as a house?
Well, and electricity in the modern day is pretty, I mean, because we could even go to the extension of, like, people say now internet is impossible to live with, but at least electricity.
Yeah. I mean, I mean,
you don't need it. You're right. You don't need it, but
yeah.
It's an expectation, I should say.
It's an expectation. Yeah. There are gradations and varying degrees of, it's that old question of what's need and what's want.
Yeah, because I mean, there's people here who still live in tents, and and that doesn't, electricity isn't part of that always.
That's right. Yeah. And there are some people who have very sturdy cardboard boxes that, even though you can laugh at them, some of them are as good as the houses that people have that's made out of wood.
Yeah.
So, I mean, yeah, they don't usually have running water,
Right. And indoor plumbing these days is also an expectation, but also not absolutely necessary. I mean, that the outdoor facilities are, it's still within range of people of our age, maybe memory, but it's becoming less and less so.
Yes. Now, keep in mind, keep that question in mind, because it will be attached to, we'll sort of circle back to it when we try to put them together. But start to think about how the house, however it's constructed, how does it affect being a home? Okay. So, but before we get to that question, I'd like you to have that kind of in the back of your mind for consideration. But before we get to that question, let's ask the same thing about a home. What are the elements that turn a house into a home?
Human relationships.
Betty, you're signaling.
Well, I want to have in my house, for it to be a home, I want to have food on hand and means to prepare, because I like to eat at home, and if people come to visit, have food available.
Okay, food. Relationships. Anything else?
Well, the overall word would be warmth, I think, right? I mean,
Overall warmth, you said?
Yeah, physically warm or warm enough environment, but also the warmth of human presence.
Okay.
I think a house or a home at its best is a warm place,
Mhm.
which is to say there's comfort in it through human presence.
Mhm. Okay, great, great. Anyone else? Something that a home should have, or something that turns a house into a home, or even if it's not a house, what makes a home? Because it might be outside and you call that home. I mean, I think Todd brought up, place, a location. So yeah, considering that, what are the ingredients or elements that make something a home?
I, I go back to safety, but in a different way.
Okay,
I
talk
feel
about
safe there, whereas the house is a structure that provides some safety from the elements and that type of thing. But a home is a place that provides safety and provides the ability to grow within that safety as a person.
Mhm, mhm. Relative to this question, and I'm not leaving this question because I think that it deserves some more exploration. Um, can a person living alone be said to be in a home? Can it be a home? And if so, talk about what are the elements there? Because Sheldon, you mentioned, I think, family, and maybe Charles did too, but family or relationships, but inside of that place or wherever, whether it's inside or not, can a person have a home by themselves? And talk about that a little bit if you think so.
Well, I live alone in my home, and it's the best time of my life
Mm-hmm.
for many reasons. I had to grow up and then grow old before I got to the point where I learned how to live by myself, with myself. And it's been a marvelous experience. And I definitely feel at home in my house, and bringing people into it adds to my joy, but I can be here and be joyful by myself.
Mm-hmm. What goes into that, Betty? Because I know I live alone too, but I'm always with all my personalities. We have all kinds of discussions. So, so in a way, I'm alone but not lonely, and you know. But okay, so what are the elements when you're by yourself? What are the things that go into making you feel this is my home as opposed to this is a house
Well,
or
comfort
just
for
a house?
me. Hmm?
I say, or just a house.
Oh, just a house without
Yeah,
it
yeah.
being a home. Yeah, well, all of my stuff and junk, I suppose, but that's not very important to me anymore. As it used to be an emotional thing. Now it's me trying to catch up to my education and my projects, and requiring supposedly all these things that I use for that. But to make it a home, sunlight coming in the windows, a nearby space where I can be outdoors, um, making it, my atmosphere usually involves music or listening to something intellectually stimulating. Um, I have a piano that I can play. I have books that I can read. I have my art studio that I can go to. Um, and the freedom to choose. I have very little responsibility thrust upon me from outside myself. So that's why I feel this is the luckiest time of my life. I've worked hard. I've done, physical things and mental things. It hasn't been easy, but it wasn't supposed to be. This isn't easy either, but it has a lot more joy and well, it just feels worthwhile to me. It feels like I have some purpose I've brought into my life, and hopefully I'm putting it out of my life to other places where other people might feel some benefit from it.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I think Betty touches on something really good there, which is home. I mean, and to me, and I have an interesting perspective, I guess. It is a feeling. It's like a belonging. It's like belonging versus belongings, right? Where you feel you belong a lot of times is what you feel is home. So I live in a place that I don't feel is home. I mean, I shouldn't say I live, but I do live, at least for the past 2 years. I'm in a place where I feel like I live in a house mostly. But my children, who largely grew up here, feel this is home. Their friends are here, and their experiences of when they grew up and the people they know most, and us, their parents, are here. That's very much their home. To me, my home is more where we own a house in Rapid, and that's my base, and I feel connected to that much more strongly. So it's interesting that my children can feel this is home, and I don't even necessarily feel this is home. But again, it comes down, I think, more of a feeling. It is a feeling. It's the place where you do feel safe, where you feel you belong, and so a lot of times in a house, you have those things because you carry things with you that have meaning. The only things that last over any period of time, a lot of times that survive many moves or, through the years and destruction, those are things that, you have worked to preserve. And a lot of times they'll carry that meaning of home with them. So a piano oftentimes will be that because you're going to take care of something over time, or, keepsakes, stuff that your parents had, or your grandparents, or your great grandparents, or your children. These are things that make home. But it's more of the feeling that they bring than the actual thing of itself.
I'll say what Todd and Betty said made me think of the word experience. It's the experiences that you're having within those homes over that period of time with those things that are a part of that. So I think of the word experience, the experiences.
Excellent. All good stuff. Anyone else? While you're thinking about it, I'd like to throw out a word that might stimulate some other thoughts and get your feedback. And I'll explain why that word I think is important. Familiarity. To be able to come into a space and have a sense of where things are. And what to expect. And to some degree, more than other places, you have some control over that environment. Not only the temperature, but whether or not light comes through the window, what kind of, music you listen to. You probably know where the important things that you have to access often are. So there's a certain amount of calm that comes to one from being in a familiar place, if for no other reason than the brain doesn't have to do as much processing. It can just sort of be okay within a framework and not look for things that are unfamiliar as to trying to figure out all of the unfamiliar things. There are things, anything that's out of place is the only thing you have to really process. Whereas outside of that house, everything's a wild card. You have to expect all kinds of things. To a lesser degree, you can have expectations, let's say, in your neighborhood or community, and then to an even lesser extent the whole city, and then state, then country, and then world. So in a sense, your concentric circle of familiarity will often begin with your home. So getting to what Todd was saying, that's where you will come back to that place, because if no other reason, then your brain can be at rest more in that space than probably other spaces that you're familiar with. Okay, so that said, what's your reaction to that, or do you have any particular experiences with that?
Boy, bingo. I had to write that down, Lawrence. I've always been a mess and just made excuses, and then even bragged about it sometimes, as if that were an indication of how creative I am, that everything was in a mess. Now, finally, I'm realizing what you just said. The things that are out of place are the only things your brain has to process when you're in a familiar place. Amen. I'm working on that, because it has freed me up. It makes me feel like I have more time, for one thing, and that I'm not so tired. So thank you for that.
Mm, mm. Anyone else have any experiences with how familiarity in a place makes you feel at home? Okay, while you're thinking about that, keep thinking, if you will. Stress, a place where you feel some familiarity will be a place that has less stress. And then now that starts to move into the relationship part. If there's low stress in that space with others, especially when you're by yourself, well, you're going to carry that around wherever you go, But with a family, if the situation is stressful, I think unless you consider that kind of stress part of being a family or a home, that's what it is. You will find the stress level could impact your sense of whether or not that house is a home. Do any of you have any experiences that might shed some light on to what degree, if at all, that is true?
Honestly, when you were saying that, Lawrence, I was thinking about how stress and a home, but my home is where I can process the stress, and sometimes go ahead and feel the stress. It's that, again, safe place to let the tears flow, to yell if I need to yell. So on it can actually help de-stress me, because it allows me to be myself. When maybe I've out in the world, you are being correct and doing all the proper things that you need to do. And my home is the place where it gives me the safe place, and it gives me the open arms, you might say, to comfort me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's either the home itself, because of that one Afghan my grandmother made that I know I can wrap myself up in, and she's still hugging me, or it's the arms of a person that I may fall into as I walk into that home.
That's a very insightful and I think important contribution, Sherilyn. Returning to a place that's welcoming and that you fit. You know, that can be a very important part of feeling at home. Anyone else has some experience with how familiarity or the ability to lower or eliminate stress is associated with having something be a home? Do, 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 do. Well, I was hoping that these wouldn't be so hard questions, but I guess I was wrong.
I could
yeah,
add something. I
sure.
think I've read a lot recently about having plants around the house as like a way to um, de-stress and distract yourself and to have that living thing. Um, yeah,
Mhm,
I don't know if I'm assuming a lot of other people in here do that.
mhm.
I know my dad does.
I just have mold in the refrigerator, but Charles, you're going to say something?
No, but sure, plants inside and out. And I suppose where you're going with this eventually might be a larger idea of home.
Mm,
So the outside plants are especially important,
mm,
as is the tradition to me,
mm,
as is the traditional tribal philosophy that the earth itself is our home.
mm,
I've mentioned my favorite novel, House Made of Dawn, and the title speaks to that.
mm,
The sky is the roof, of course, and the whole earth
mm,
is the floor of our home. And if you've been to a powwow, you know that the drumming is the thing, as is the dancing to the pulse of the earth itself. Is inspirited as we are in connection with the earth. So over time, unfortunately, society has distanced itself from all of that. And I'm all for enclosures, which are comforting. And, you know, I have a good sense of home in the house I've lived in for many years and in the houses where I grew up, which are still standing. But the earth itself is my home. And that's where I want to be. I have a sense of place, a love of landscape. I have a particular love of this northern plains landscape. It frustrates me to see it diminished in certain ways. I think that's not good for anybody, even the developers. So this larger idea of home, and you know, there's been some theological conditioning against that. The earth is not our home, heaven is our home. Well, you know, I'm good with that, but it tends to disparage our Aboriginal home,
mm,
which either defines us or reduces us depending on how we behave within it. And so I think if we all had this larger sense of the earth itself as home, we would be at home wherever we are, inside or out. And we would seek those natural places which enliven us and enrich our spirits.
mm.
And that turned into kind of a mini lecture from courses taught, Lawrence, but I feel pretty strongly about all that.
Yeah. Well, I think you hit on exactly my point, Charles, is that it is part of a bigger picture. but I always like to start when I can with something that's and ideas that are more familiar, people that, you know, ideas that people can say, okay, I can relate to that because I live in a house and I'd like my house to be a home, or it is a home. But it does have to do with that greater relationship of where we are. And I'd go one step further and say home is where the head is, you know, is because that's where you have to live all the time. You know, you can't, if, well, there's some people who escape that, but we know who they are, you know, it becomes apparent pretty quick. But in general, you know, the place where we live most is in our head, but we can get back to that maybe a little bit later. But that's the big picture. Okay, well, if we go from the inside picture to the really big picture. But what you do bring up, though, Charles, is the extent to which where we are physically can be our home, and how do we make something our home? How do we feel at home in a place? Because even the home that we have, if we have this house that we live in and we say, okay, this is my home, we had to make that. There was energy that went into that. There was thought that went into that. And there's time too that goes into it, you know, depending on the depth of what you call a home is. So I'd like to explore, if you will, what kinds of things can we contribute to a space, a new space, wherever that space might be, that can give us some of the same elements that we, especially the positive ones, that we experience from being in our homes. What kind of things can you personally bring to that?
Yeah, I might take exception to the question.
Mm.
I don't think we have to make or construct anything. I mean, that's the impulse to do something to spaces, development, if you will. Such an ironic word, development. The kind of natural spaces I love shouldn't have anything done to them. It's about me finding ways to engage them, to be in those places and of those places. Even your choice of words is interesting, that this idea that we need to be proactive in physical spaces. I think that's been more often the problem than the solution.
Can you talk a little bit about that? Can you expand on that a little bit?
Well, yeah, I'd rather go to the woods than to a state park, for instance. I mean, it's good that we have these places which we set aside and we systematize and we regulate in certain ways. I mean, that needs to be done or we wouldn't have any places to go to. But even in those places, I don't think of what's been done as an improvement. And I would rather go to places which are so-called unimproved. You know, Thoreau said this in many voices, we need the wilderness. And the idea of wilderness, wilderness was a word that was stigmatized, of course, by the immigrants. They had to tame the wilderness, they had to systematize everything. The tribal people didn't think in those terms. They thought in terms of Mother Earth, literally. That's been probably worn out as an expression, but it's also true that that we are children of the earth. And so, back to what I said earlier, my favorite places are places where not only where I don't have to do anything, but where things haven't been done. They are just the way they are. And I need to try to be in relationship with that. And heartens me to be in a relationship with that.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, I would say I agree with that in the macro, or in the big picture. But I was really, when I was saying that, I was trying to compare, and you did a very good job of comparing that actually. What we do in our places that we want to feel familiar, we arrange things so that we don't have to think about them, or they lower the stress level. For example, in the wilderness, uh, there's the word wild, which means that there are wild cards always in the wilderness. Now, if we go to a state park, to a certain extent, we expect someone else to, let's say, uh, regulate to at least a certain degree some of the things that ordinarily we would have to think about. You know, what kind of I'm not saying that's always all good, but to the degree that we can feel comfortable, a lot of the stressors are removed, often without us being even aware that they have been removed. Those are the most successful ones. But if we look in terms of like our house, one of the things, the house that we live in, one of the things that I noticed that even people in homeless shelters or homeless, in a cardboard box, they have a certain organization inside that box, because that allows us a certain amount of, I know where that thing is, even if it ain't that much, but you know where it is. Now you don't have to really think about it unless it moves. Now, if it moves, then that, especially by itself, you know, then we have an issue. But as long as it just stays there, we're all good. As long as the bed feels the same or pretty near the same when we lay down, that's an expectation. As
I'm not so comfortable with your multiple references to cardboard boxes. For me, they are images of homelessness in America, and people do what they have to do, of course, and live in such places. But those are also images of America's failure to care for its own. And homelessness is epidemic in our country now. Friends of mine who live in California tell me that there are places where you can no longer go because they are so overpopulated with the homeless who are doing what they can do in and out of cardboard boxes. And so the cardboard box to me anymore is it's a tragic image.
It is to me.
It's a dramatization of what's wrong with us. By us, I mean our whole society.
It is to me too, Charles. But I do respect those people's place. That's what they have. I'm not saying that's all they should have. I'm certainly 100% against that. In a way, it's kind of to say, okay, but whatever you have, that's what you have. And those people, I give them the respect of trying to make the best of what they have. And so I respect that, I don't condescend on them because that's what they have and they're doing what they can. That's my signal to that.
As far as your other question, I garden. If you want to talk about regulated outdoor spaces, that's some comfort to me. I systematize the earth to some extent by planting things in rows and watering it and watching it grow. So even though that's me orchestrating the organic, it's still some relationship with the organic. And that's good for me. On these wonderful fleeting summer days, I ought to be outdoors all the time. That's one of the problems we have, isn't it? That we are too housebound because of all the stuff that we think we have to do. And we all, in my view, ought to put all that stuff down more often than just go outside, whether or not we're gardening, whether or not we're doing lawn care. So, that's, as I said, I don't rule out state parks, and I find that in and around my house, it's good for me to be out tending to the organic. It encourages me to do that. It's not just the vegetables that I'm going to harvest here pretty quick.
But But, and I think I remember earlier in the conversation, there was some indication about houseplants being important as far as, creating an environment in a home.
Yeah, Ryan said that, and I agree with that. I think it's important to have a plant in our sun porch, which was given to us many, many years ago by a colleague who has been gone for many years. And I tend to that plant, especially with her in mind, and it periodically blossoms when it does. I feel good about the care I've given that plant. And I recall the many good things I think were a consequence of my relationship with this colleague. And so, sure, there's that organic connection, I'd be pretty sad if that plant took a turn for the worse. But I've had it and it's been blossoming for 20 years, and Donna has been gone for at least, I don't know, 10 or 12.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I think people have some sentimental attachment to plants, and I don't see anything wrong with that either. That's good,
Sure.
Grandma's geranium, keep it blooming.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, even if grandma isn't,
Exactly. Well, she's blooming in your mind and heart, isn't she?
Yeah, there you go. Sherilyn also mentioned a blanket. I think it was a blanket, right? So there are things that stimulate memories, and there are things that give us certain emotional responses. And I would think that in something someone calls a home, we have a greater degree of control over what those things are. The things that bring us not so good memories or thoughts or emotion, we can get rid of them if we want. And then there are other things that bring us a certain amount of pleasure, and we can put those in a place, in a strategic place where we see them, or we pass them, or in some cases, people go so far as to put them in a place where they can be touched. I know one of my Jewish friends who has an emblem, and I can't think of the name of the object now, but that goes over the door. And every time he goes in or out of his house, he touches that and kisses his hand, or kisses his hand and touch that. And it has real significance to him, So there are things that we can arrange in our lives, in our homes, that make it a home. That's why I'm asking the question, what kind of things can we do? Todd?
Well, yeah, I just of note, we're moving this weekend. And so we've been forced out of the house we're in because they're going to tear it up and put in new electricity. So we're going to move, across the community into another house that's different. And it's just interesting when you talk about, I think, we know the things we think of that are very close to us, but even in the environment, as my wife and I have begin moving stuff over, because we've been doing it for over a week now, and the movers will be in to the day after tomorrow for the big stuff. And then the next day we'll be moved. But our difficulty isn't just with stuff that and you hold, but you also have the familiarity. You talked about that. I think we are often, as I'm learning, more attached to familiarity than the actual stuff. So as we've taken over there and say, well, we have one less bedroom, we have this stuff, how are we going to put it together? How are we going to, well, this can be your office space. Well, this can be our bedroom. Well, what about this bedroom? And you start realizing, what I've realized as we've been moving is that, and we've actually had to stop ourselves, say, we are just trying to cast where we are now into a new environment.
Yes.
Instead of saying, here's the environment I'm in, and what would make it better for me or to live in and be more comfortable, we should think of this. So sometimes you have to put yourself into a different place and still maintain, that sense of home. And, to try to cram it into something that isn't that space is difficult. And you had brought up homelessness. I was not cardboard box homeless, but I was homeless for a while, even while holding a job, even while being an editor of a newspaper. And I'll tell you that, for me at that time, and that's only in a technical case because I just didn't have a place to live. I didn't have enough money to rent a place, but I had friends and I lived in a community. I never felt homeless. I felt like I didn't have a house, but I had a whole community. My parents lived in the community. If I ever had to crash, I could be on their couch. They didn't care, and I always had friends and stuff. And, I slept at work sometimes. I mean, there was stuff I could do. So there's a sense, it is, but you talk about being able to control your environment. That was a big part even then, because I had to have my clothes in the car a certain way. I had to have a place to go. My office, which Ryan will know, my desk was never clean. It was a disaster area. But during that time period, my desk was very clean. It was the one time it was a place I had control. And I think you hit on something there that, a lot of times it's just the space you have, the ability to kind of get comfortable in it makes it more homeward. Or even when you break away from the space. And that's what it really did for me is I moved. Houses don't hold home much for me anymore, but communities and people do. And I think, Chuck's talking about, an exterior space. It's true, but it even goes beyond that. It can be people. It can be just, your experience in a lot of ways becomes more home. For me, after that whole experience, I just really kind of no longer try to tie it down to a house, because to me, a house wasn't a given always after that. That you can hold a full-time job and not have a house was a concept I didn't have when I went to college. It took me going and experiencing it, going, okay, well, then what makes it home? And I think control and environment, but also being able to break free of those even constraints and say, where do I belong? Where are the people I should be with? Where's the space I need to be in? And so I'm going through that again now as we move. Right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It gets back to home is in the head. It's like, what can you make? And that's kind of the direction that, that I wanted to point this discussion, because a lot of our ability to, let's say, adjust to new people, new environment, and things like that hinges on whether or not we can create that familiarity with people and with the things. And the more we can feel like we kind of know where things are and know how things work, the more we can feel like we know how our world works. I don't think we can ever really, I don't even think I can figure out how I work completely, but certainly in the whole world, we don't figure it out, but to the degree that we can understand others and feel a certain familiarity with them, or be comfortable with that we really don't know. This person is a kind of a wild card and we really don't know, but we can become, let's say, familiar with their unfamiliarity, that they do have these differences and anything can happen, but we can start to see realistically a pattern, and then we can be comfortable. And as we go through the world, we can start to figure out, I don't really have to know all the time, but there are all these common denominators that pretty much I'm going to expect all the time. For example, you go to a new place and you meet new people. There are some baseline things that you can expect of every human being. Not saying those expectations will always be met, but there's a darn good chance that that those people have some things that you can depend on from any human being that you meet. I'd like you to tell me what you think some of those things are. This gets to feeling familiar with people, even that you don't know. Okay. Yeah, I think you're probably, I may have like not given you enough clues because, okay, at least for me, this is not a hard question. For example, I assume whenever I meet someone that that person's breathing, okay? They inhale and they exhale, and that if you stop that, they would not be happy, you know? I think that that's a reasonable assumption, okay? I think that every person I meet has need of water, and they both take in that water and they excrete that water in many different ways. Okay. I think I can expect that unless that person is really sick or they're not going to be happy if that's not happening. Okay. I can also expect that all those people um, eat, they need nourishment. I can expect that they don't raise their hands up in the air and do solar conversions. You know, they don't do photosynthesis. Okay. So what are some other things, you know, Maslow helped me out with that, you know, he was my coach. Uh, what are some other things that we can expect so that we can feel familiar? There are some baseline things that we know about every human being. Uh, what are some other things?
Most people have a need to be seen, to be
Mhm.
acknowledged that they exist, even if it's just a glance in their direction, or
Mhm.
maybe so far as to say hello, or ask them to sit down and have a cup of coffee with you.
Mm. Mhm. Okay.
I think every human being, whether they admit it or not, have a whole range of emotions.
Mm. Okay.
There may be some they deny, but they exist.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. A range of emotions. Okay. Anyone else? Something that when you meet a new person in a new environment, taking your home with you, the ability to create home wherever you are, would benefit from knowing, having a familiarity or understanding how you do know something about a situation, even if you think you don't. Anything else? Okay. So I think that that's something, a road that I would like to encourage you to go down and think about those things. Look around you and start to see those things that are common denominators in humans, you know, that you meet. Okay. And try to be as, let's say, broad as possible. You know, I think it would, that would help you to see those things and uncover the things because they're often sitting right out there. And of course, you won't be able to do that unless you meet some new people. You know, if you're with the same people all the time, they become familiar. But to the degree that they've become familiar, it's easy to forget that there are other people who have the same things that make you feel familiar and close to those people. There are other people who have the same things, whether they are needs or foibles, even, you know, because it's more the unexpected than the untoward, I think, you know, that sort of creates problems between human beings. Like, you know, the stress of not knowing, you know, the brain doesn't really like to not know, you know, and we kind of have to train it to be accepting of that and just say, okay, I don't know. Let's see, you know, let's test or let's observe, you know, so what is there, you know, and so to that degree, using those kind of approaches, I think we can start to make lots of places feel like home, you know, and lots of people feel like family because we can start to we can start to make them feel like we expected their family. And if they don't, why aren't you acting like your family, man? You know, like you're all family. It's kind of like if somebody that is your, let's say, biological family that you grew up with suddenly started acting like they didn't belong. You know, they came to your house and they offered to pay you for the meal, for breakfast after you made them breakfast. You wouldn't be happy, right? I mean, you know, okay, give me the money, but don't give it to me for something else. You know, but the idea that they're going to pay you for lunch, you know, or, you know, or leave a dime at the toilet or something like that, they wouldn't feel like you wouldn't feel like their family, you know? So to that, using that same kind of analogy, if we can make other people feel like, you know, you belong and they belong, somehow I think that's a good thing. I'll just say it works for me, you know, to the degree that I can make people feel that they belong in my life, you know, that they're not an outsider, even if they're crazy, you know. It's like I have lots of crazy friends, maybe mostly crazy friends, you know. So to the degree that you can make people feel that way, at least for me, I find a home everywhere. I find home everywhere because I end up treating every place like home, you know. Yeah.
It kind of goes back, really goes to what Charles said about, Earth as our home.
Mm,
And you triggered the thought in my head that really, like, Sioux Falls is my home.
mm, mm,
South Dakota is my home. The United States is my home.
mm.
So, all of a sudden it kind of just sparked many different levels of what home is.
Mm, mm, mm. Yeah. And I would say even what it could be, you know, it's like once you start thinking that way, at least that's what happened for me. You know, I start seeing all kinds of possibilities of where places that could be home, and or at least temporarily, even if not permanently be. And the permanence has to do with, well, whether I would like to be there or some other place, and I go to that place, you know. But for the time I'm there, to be able to feel at home gives me a certain amount of well, it reduces quite a bit of stress that would be there otherwise, you know, because I can feel a certain familiarity. And when I meet people, I'm less stressed than I would be probably, you know, because I can start to see the things that we have in common, and I start to focus on what we have in common as opposed to what we have in difference, you know, and I'm able to see through all of their other facades that they have, or the costumes that they wear, both physical and mentally, um, and see through to some other being inside of that package that they call their body, you know, because I feel like that's the real them. That's what I have to say about houses and homes. And yeah, thank you all for the participation and sharing your thoughts. I think we can see just from the comments that other people have benefited from whatever you're sharing. And we'll hope to do this again next week, same time, same station.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Bye.